The morning light filtered through the windows of the Upper East Side apartment like a golden intruder. Emily Morgan opened her eyes slowly, disoriented by the touch of Egyptian cotton sheets against her skin. They were as soft as whispered promises and cost more than 6 months of her rent in that tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Brooklyn. The space beside her still held the warm imprint of a body, but James was no longer there. Only a handwritten note remained on the nightstand, with elegant, firm handwriting that seemed to draw rather than write. "Don't run away. I need to see you again." Sometimes the most significant encounters happen when we stop looking, when fate decides it's time to stumble upon something that will change the course of our existence, she thought as she held that paper between her trembling fingers. 3 days earlier, Emily would never have imagined finding herself in this situation. At 22, she was simply a literature student at Columbia University, with honey-colored eyes that seemed to guard ancient secrets and a shyness that made her blush easily. She carried the invisible weight of being the first in her family to attend university, a pride mixed with responsibility that accompanied her every day since she left her small town in Virginia. That night, she had agreed to substitute for her friend Olivia as a waitress at the most exclusive charity event in New York, held at the majestic Metropolitan Opera. The salary for one night equaled an entire week working at the bookstore, where she usually took shifts to pay for her studies. With her hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and wearing a black uniform that was slightly too big, she moved among New York's elite, serving glasses of champagne and smiling politely. That's when it happened. In an unexpected turn while dodging an overly enthusiastic photographer, her tray tilted, and the golden bubbly liquid spilled onto the silk tie of one of the guests. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me—" she stammered, her cheeks burning as she tried to remedy the disaster with a napkin. But the man wasn't looking at the stain. His dark eyes, as penetrating as the New York night, were fixed on her. He was tall, with the kind of presence that made conversation stop when he entered a room. His black hair, sprinkled with grey at the temples, gave him an air of serene authority that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "How much do you make in a night?" he suddenly asked, with a deep voice that seemed to caress each syllable. The question surprised her so much that she responded with honesty, whispering the amount with a trembling voice. The man took out his wallet, doubled the sum, and offered it to her with a gesture that brooked no refusal. "I'd like you to stay by my side for the rest of the event. Not as a waitress, just with me." This man was James Harrison, 43 years old, founder and CEO of Harrison Global, a technology empire built from scratch. Economic magazines described him as ruthless, visionary, inaccessible. What these publications didn't mention was the emptiness that had inhabited his chest for 10 years, when a devastating divorce after discovering a betrayal had robbed him of his ability to trust. Now, as Emily contemplated New York awakening under a sky that was beginning to clear, she remembered every moment of that night that had changed her life. The conversations about literature in a secluded corner of the event, how he quoted Virginia Woolf from memory, the way he listened to her as if each of her words was a treasure to be discovered. She rose from the bed, wrapping her body in the sheet while searching for her clothes. In the reflection of the window she saw a stranger, herself but different, as if she had crossed an invisible threshold into a world where everything was both possible and terrifying. "What have I done?" she murmured to herself, aware that what had begun as an unexpected encounter was turning into something she wasn't prepared for. The Grand Lecture Hall in Columbia's literature department buzzed with activity that morning. Professor Martin, with his characteristic passion, was lecturing on magical realism in Latin American literature, but Emily, usually the first to take meticulous notes, barely listened. Her thoughts constantly drifted to the previous night, to those hours suspended in time with James. "Where are you today, Emily?" whispered Sarah, her best friend, giving her a gentle nudge. "I've sent you 3 messages since yesterday, and nothing. Was the charity event that bad?" Emily felt the heat rising to her cheeks. How could she explain the inexplicable? How could she put into words the immediate connection she had felt with a man 20 years her senior, from a world completely different from her own? "It was interesting," she finally replied, with an enigmatic smile that didn't go unnoticed by her friend. 15 miles away on the 27th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, James contemplated the New York horizon through the windows of his office. The board meeting had been postponed because he, for the first time in his career, was not mentally present. His assistant, Isabella, had repeated the same question 3 times without getting a response. "James, are you all right?" she insisted, concerned by this behavior so uncharacteristic of him. "I've never seen you like this." He turned slowly, as if waking from a trance. "I'm fine, Isabella. I just need some air." "Cancel my afternoon appointments." In his minimalist office, where every object had a specific function, where efficiency was the supreme norm, James suddenly felt trapped. He opened the top drawer of his desk and extracted the small card Emily had given him when saying goodbye that morning. A hastily scribbled phone number and slightly slanted letters. Her name. "It's madness," he murmured to himself, running his fingers over that piece of paper as if it contained some kind of magic. "She has her whole life ahead of her. She doesn't need someone like me complicating it." And yet he couldn't stop thinking about the way she had analyzed an Emily Dickinson poem, how her eyes lit up when talking about her dreams of becoming a writer, the disarming honesty with which she admitted her fears. The contrast between their lives could not have been more striking. While Emily returned that afternoon to her shared apartment in Brooklyn, where neighbors' noise filtered through thin walls and the shower only offered hot water for 5 minutes, James dined alone in his 4,000-square-foot penthouse, surrounded by opulent silence and a panoramic view many would pay to contemplate. "What's up with you today?" asked Jessica, one of Emily's roommates, as they shared a simple dinner. "You're like absent." Emily stirred her plate of pasta, searching for the right words. "Do you think 2 completely different people can truly connect? Beyond circumstances, age, money?" Jessica put down her fork and looked at her friend curiously. "Who exactly are we talking about?" But Emily merely smiled, keeping to herself the secret that made her heart beat faster, a secret that seemed impossible but had begun to take root in the depths of her being. "Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become our own prisons," she thought, as she contemplated the lights of New York from her small window. "And sometimes, when we least expect it, someone appears with the right key." 3 days later, when Emily had almost convinced herself that that night had been just an unrepeatable parenthesis in her everyday life, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "May I call you?" "Jack." Those 3 simple words unleashed a storm inside her. She breathed deeply, trying to calm the racing beats of her heart before responding with a brief "yes." The phone rang almost immediately. On the other end, James's deep voice seemed to envelop the small room. "Emily," he pronounced her name as if it were something precious, something that should be handled with care. "I've tried not to call you. I've tried to convince myself that it would be better to leave things as they are, but I've thought about you too," she confessed, surprised by her own boldness. The words had escaped her lips before she could stop them. A silence loaded with possibilities followed. "There's a private exhibition at MoMA this Friday," he finally said. "Emerging Latin American artists. I thought that maybe, if you don't have other plans—" Emily closed her eyes. Part of her, the rational part, screamed that this was madness, that she should focus on her studies, on her goals. But another part, perhaps the most authentic, yearned to see where this unexpected path might lead her. "I'd love to," she finally answered. The exhibition turned out to be a revelation. James picked her up in a discreet car, without a driver, driving himself. He dressed informally, with a grey cashmere sweater over dark jeans, so different from the corporate image he usually projected that Emily barely recognized him at first. As they toured the galleries, she discovered that James had a deep knowledge of contemporary art. He didn't speak to impress, but with the genuine passion of someone who had found beauty and meaning in artistic expressions. "This painting reminds me of Virginia," he commented, stopping before a canvas that showed an arid landscape under an immense sky. Emily looked at him in surprise. "You know my home state?" James smiled, with that smile that completely transformed his usually serious face. "I did a little research. I wanted to understand where you come from, what shaped you." That small detail, that attention to what was important to her, brought down another layer of her defenses. As they left the exhibition, New York greeted them with a soft drizzle. James extended his umbrella, creating an intimate space amidst the bustle of Fifth Avenue. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Emily nodded, expecting him to suggest some exclusive restaurant where she would feel out of place. Instead, James surprised her by taking her to a small deli in Greenwich Village, an unpretentious place that served the best bagels in the city. "I've been coming here since I was a student without a penny to my name," he confessed, as they savored warm bagels with cream cheese and coffee. "It reminds me that everything I have now could disappear tomorrow, and the essentials remain." In that moment, surrounded by the sweet aroma of coffee and the hubbub of New Yorkers seeking refuge from the rain, Emily glimpsed the man behind the facade of the ruthless businessman. A man with insecurities, with memories, with wounds that still hadn't completely healed. "Why me, James?" she suddenly asked, needing to understand. "You could be with any woman, women from your world, with experience, with sophistication." He contemplated his cup for a few seconds before answering, "Because when you look at me, you see James. Not the CEO of Harrison Global, not the bank account, not the man who appears in magazines. Just me." And it had been a long time since anyone did that. The sincerity of his response left her speechless, and so, between bagels and confidences, between laughter and complicit glances, something began that neither of them had planned, but that they could no longer, nor wanted to, stop. Perhaps life isn't about finding perfect people, Emily thought as they walked back together in the rain, but about learning to see perfectly imperfect people we encounter. Over the following weeks, New York became the setting for a clandestine romance that blossomed in the most unexpected corners. James and Emily built their own universe in second-hand bookstores in Greenwich Village, in private screenings of classic films, in long walks through Central Park as it began to empty at dusk. With each encounter, the barriers between them crumbled a little more. Emily discovered that beneath his appearance of absolute control, James harbored deep insecurities. He confessed to her how, despite his success, he sometimes felt like that boy from a small town in Maine who sold newspapers at traffic lights to help his family. "Money changes how the world sees you, but not how you see yourself," he told her one night as they shared a bottle of wine on the terrace of his building. "Sometimes I still expect someone to discover that I'm an imposter, that I don't really belong in this world." She in turn revealed her most intimate fears, the terror of failing, of disappointing her parents who had placed all their hopes in her, the first Morgan to attend an Ivy League university. "It's like carrying an invisible weight all the time," she murmured. "As if every exam, every paper, every decision weren't just mine, but of everyone who's believed in me." James took her hand with a delicacy that contradicted his public image. "You are much more than others' expectations, Emily. You're brilliant in your own right, not because of what others expect of you." But as their connection deepened, complications began to arise. Sarah, Emily's best friend, started to notice changes in her. She cancelled plans at the last minute, was constantly distracted, and guarded her phone as if it contained state secrets. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked directly one afternoon as they studied in the library. "And don't tell me you're not, because I know you too well." Emily hesitated. Part of the magic of her relationship with James resided in that secrecy, in that space protected from outside gazes. But Sarah wasn't just anyone. She had been her confidant since the first day of college. "It's complicated," she finally admitted. "Complicated how? Is he married? A professor?" Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "No, it's nothing like that. It's just that there's an age difference and different circumstances. He's established. I'm barely starting my life." Sarah studied her with concern. "Be careful, Em. Sometimes people with power see relationships differently. I don't want you to get hurt." Her friend's words stayed with her, sowing the first seeds of doubt. Was this real, or just a passing fancy for James? What future could a relationship have between two people from such different worlds? That night, as they dined in James's apartment, Emily observed the luxury surrounding her with new eyes. Original paintings by renowned artists, designer furniture, fine china. Everything spoke of a life light years away from hers. "What are you thinking?" asked James, noticing her distraction. "About us, about how different we are, about how sometimes I wonder what you really see in me." He set down his wine glass and looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "I see someone who makes me feel alive after years of merely existing. I see intelligence, passion, honesty. I see a future that, for the first time in a long time, I want to share with someone." His words should have reassured her, but instead, they awakened a new fear in her. Because if this was real, if James truly felt what he said, then the consequences would be immense. Her life would never be the same. That night, as James slept beside her, Emily contemplated the ceiling, lost in contradictory thoughts. Love should be simple, but this wasn't. It was beautiful and frightening, liberating and overwhelming. Sometimes the most important decisions aren't made all at once, she thought, but in small, almost imperceptible steps, until one day you wake up and discover your heart has already chosen for you. Emily's life had divided into two parallel realities that were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile each day. On one hand, she continued to be the dedicated student, working part-time at the bookstore, sharing coffees with her friends between classes. On the other, she experienced moments of overwhelming intensity with James, discovering facets of herself she didn't even know existed. The pressure began to manifest in subtle ways. Grades that slightly dropped, dark circles that makeup could no longer disguise, a constant feeling of living halfway in both worlds, without fully belonging to either. One Friday afternoon, while reorganizing books in the poetry section of the bookstore where she worked, Emily was startled to see James enter. He had never before appeared at her workplace. They had kept their encounters carefully planned, far from familiar gazes. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, nervously glancing at her boss, who was attending to a customer at the other end of the store. James, dressed with studied simplicity that nevertheless failed to hide his natural air of authority, handed her an envelope. "I have to travel to London tonight. A problem with the company's expansion that I can't solve remotely. I'll be gone for 2 weeks." Emily took the envelope, confused. "Open it when you're alone," he added, briefly brushing her fingers as he handed her the envelope. "Think it over, no pressure." Before she could ask more, James had left, leaving behind the trail of his cologne and an envelope that seemed to burn between her hands. That night, in the solitude of her room, Emily opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a key, an address in Soho, and a note written in James's unmistakable handwriting. "This place is yours if you desire it. A space of your own, no strings attached. I just want you to have the freedom to choose how and where to live your life." The implications of that gesture hit her hard. It wasn't simply the offer of an apartment, it was an invitation to take a decisive step in their relationship, to allow James to be a more permanent, more visible part of her life. Emily spent the night wide awake, torn between desire and fear, between the independence she had always valued and the temptation to accept this gift that would change her life. Was it a demonstration of genuine love, or a subtle form of control? Was James buying her affection, or simply offering her an opportunity she would never otherwise have? The following morning, mustering her courage, she visited the address indicated. The apartment was bright, with high ceilings and windows overlooking an inner courtyard full of greenery. It wasn't as ostentatious as James's penthouse, but cozy, with empty bookshelves waiting to be filled with her books, a small study with a desk by the window. The perfect place to write. Returning to Brooklyn, the difference between both worlds had never seemed so evident. The constant noise of neighbors, the peeling walls, the incessantly dripping shower. And yet, this had been her home for 2 years. Here she had laughed with her roommates, cried over failed exams, celebrated small victories. Jessica found her sitting in the kitchen, looking out the window with an absent expression. "Earth to Emily," she joked, waving a hand in front of her face. "You've been staring at the same spot for half an hour. Is everything okay?" Emily made a sudden decision. She needed advice, and Jessica, with her pragmatism and her clear vision of life, had always been a good counselor. "If someone offered you the opportunity to completely change your life," she began, carefully choosing her words, "but it meant moving away from everything you know, from your comfort zone, would you do it?" Jessica sat across from her, suddenly serious. "It depends. Would you be moving away from something, or moving toward something? Because there's a big difference." The question hit her with unexpected clarity. Was she fleeing her current life or advancing towards something she truly desired? "I think both," she admitted, "and that's what scares me." "Fear isn't always a warning sign," Jessica responded, with a wisdom that contradicted her youth. Sometimes it's just the way our heart tells us something really matters. That night, Emily made the most difficult decision of her life so far. She sent a message to James, who would already be in London. "I accept the apartment, but with one condition. I'll pay for it myself when I can. It won't be a gift, but a loan. I need to maintain my independence, even as I let you come closer to my life." The response arrived almost immediately, as if he had been waiting by the phone. "Your conditions are mine." The decisions that define us, she thought as she carefully packed her books in boxes, aren't the ones we make when everything is clear, but those we make in the twilight of uncertainty, guided only by the faint light of what we believe is right in the depths of our being. The new apartment quickly became a sanctuary for Emily, a space she began to fill with her essence, books stacked by the window, a growing collection of plants her parents sent from Virginia, reproductions of her favorite painters bought at weekend flea markets. "All I want is to see you shine, on your own terms." As she began to pack her few belongings, Emily felt a mixture of vertigo and determination. She was about to cross a threshold into the unknown, into a version of her life she had never imagined. The 2 weeks of James's absence passed with exasperating slowness. They talked every night on the phone, conversations that extended until dawn in New York, while in London he contemplated the sunset. He told her about endless meetings, about constant pressure, about how every decision he made affected the lives of hundreds of employees. "Sometimes I envy your freedom," he confessed one night. "The ability to decide your path without the weight of so many external expectations." Emily laughed softly. "We all carry our own chains, James. Mine might be less visible, but they're no less heavy." The day before his return, Emily decided to prepare a special dinner in her apartment. She wanted to surprise him, show him that she was making this space her own, that she was committed to this new phase of her life. While buying ingredients at a farmer's market, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with Sarah's concerned expression. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked without preamble. "I heard from Jessica that you've moved, and suddenly you live in Soho? How can you afford that?" Emily felt the heat rising to her cheeks. She had been avoiding Sarah precisely because of this, because her friend was too perceptive, too direct. "It's complicated," she began, but Sarah interrupted her. "Em, we've been friends since day one. If you're in trouble, if you need help." The genuine concern in her voice moved Emily. She realized she had been isolating herself, protecting her relationship with James at the cost of friendships that had always been there for her. "I'm not in trouble," she assured, taking her friend's hands. "I'm in love, and it's scary and wonderful all at once." Sarah's expression softened. "Why didn't you tell me? Who is he?" Emily made a split-second decision. Sarah deserved the truth. "Can we get coffee? It's a long story." In a nearby cafe with the bustle of New York as a backdrop, Emily finally shared her secret. She told her about the meeting at the Metropolitan Opera, the conversations until dawn, how James saw in her things she hadn't even recognized in herself. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression transitioning from surprise to concern, and finally to a resigned caution. "James Harrison," she said finally, as if processing the information. "The same one who appeared on the cover of Fortune last month, the one they say is ruthless in business." Emily nodded slowly. "He's much more than that, Sarah. With me, he's different. He's vulnerable, attentive, he's 20 years older than you," Sarah completed, "and with power and influence that could crush you if things go wrong." Her friend's words fell like stones into the tranquil pond Emily had built in her mind. "It's not like that," she protested, but part of her recognized the truth in that warning. "He respects me. He values me for who I am, not for what I can offer him." Sarah sighed, extending a hand across the table to take her friend's. "Just be careful, okay? Fairy tales tend to omit the complicated parts. And please, don't disappear like that again. I was worried about you." When Emily returned to her apartment, Sarah's words still echoed in her mind. As she prepared dinner, chopping vegetables with methodical precision, she allowed herself to consider what she hadn't wanted to see: the undeniable inequality of power in their relationship, the complications that would inevitably arise when their romance ceased to be a secret. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Opening the door, she found James, who had returned a day earlier than planned. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, but his face lit up upon seeing her. "I couldn't wait another day," he confessed, embracing her as if afraid she might vanish in his arms. "I've been counting the hours." And as they dined at the small table she had set up by the window, while he told her stories of his trip and she shared the small victories of her week, Emily felt that, despite all the complications, this was real. What existed between them couldn't be measured in terms of power or money or age. It was something deeper, truer. "People will judge us," she said suddenly, interrupting James's account of a restaurant in London. "They'll say I'm with you for your money, that you're with me because I'm young and make you feel powerful." James set down his wineglass, studying her face attentively. "And does that worry you? What others say?" Emily slowly shook her head. "I'm worried it might be true, that there are truths we don't want to see, that we're building something on quicksand." He reached his hand across the table, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Uncomfortable truths only destroy us when we ignore them, Emily. If we look them in the face, if we acknowledge them, we can build upon them, not despite them." In that moment, as candlelight cast dancing shadows on the apartment walls, Emily understood that what they had begun wouldn't be easy. It would be complex, sometimes contradictory, always challenging. But perhaps that was precisely what made it valuable. Sometimes the most important revelations, she thought, as she observed their intertwined hands, aren't answers, but better questions. Not absolute certainties, but the willingness to navigate uncertainty together. The New York spring was in full bloom, dressing parks in colors and filling the air with a sweet fragrance that invited long walks. After nearly 3 months of clandestine relationship, James and Emily had established a routine that worked surprisingly well. Weekends were theirs, dedicated to discovering corners of New York that even he, having lived his entire life in the city, didn't know. During the week she focused on her studies and he on his company, connecting through nightly phone calls that often surprised them with the dawn. It was James who suggested taking the next step. "I'd like you to meet someone important to me," he said one Sunday morning, as they had breakfast on his penthouse terrace. "My sister Elena is in town. She's the only family that really matters to me." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. Until now, they had kept their relationship in a protective bubble, away from external gazes, from others' judgments. Meeting James's family meant making real what, until then, had existed in a space suspended between two worlds. "Does she know about me?" she asked, nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. "She knows there's someone who's brought back my desire to smile," he replied, with that intense gaze that still made her heart race. "And that's all she needs to know. The rest she'll discover when she meets you." Dinner was arranged at a discreet restaurant in the West Village, one of those places that don't appear in tourist guides, but that New Yorkers zealously guard as a well-kept secret. Eleanor Harrison turned out to be a woman of about 50, with the same natural air of authority as her brother, but with an immediate warmth in her eyes that put Emily at ease almost instantly. "So you're the one responsible for the change in my brother," she said after introductions, studying her with genuine interest. "I haven't seen him so relaxed since we were children." The dinner flowed with unexpected ease. Helena was an art history professor at Yale, and soon she and Emily were engrossed in an animated discussion about the role of women in American art. James observed the exchange with a satisfied smile, occasionally intervening, but mainly enjoying seeing the two most important women in his life connecting. It was at the end of dinner, when James excused himself to take an urgent call, that Elena leaned across the table and took Emily's hand. "My brother has suffered a lot," she said quietly. "His ex-wife destroyed him in ways I can't even explain. For years I watched him retreat into work, building ever higher walls. I was convinced he would never allow himself to love again." Emily felt the weight of that confession, the responsibility implicit in Elena's words. "I didn't seek this out," she responded with honesty. "It happened. And sometimes I still wonder if I can handle all it implies, if I'm strong enough." Eleanor smiled with a mixture of understanding and warning. "The world James moves in can be ruthless, Emily. There will be people who'll try to use your relationship to hurt him, to hurt you. The difference in age, experience, power, all of that will be ammunition for those who enjoy destroying what they don't understand." Before Emily could respond, James returned to the table. The conversation turned to lighter topics, but Elena's words remained etched in her mind. Elena's warning proved prophetic. Just a week later, while Emily waited for James on the terrace of a cafe in Midtown, she noticed a man with a professional camera taking photos of her from across the street. When James arrived and greeted her with a kiss, the sound of the shutter intensified. 3 days later, her face appeared on the cover of a gossip magazine. "Who is the mysterious young woman who has captured America's most eligible bachelor?" asked the headline above a photo of them holding hands in Times Square. The effect was immediate and devastating. University colleagues who had barely noticed her before now looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and envy. Professors who had praised her papers began to examine them with renewed skepticism, as if suspecting someone else had written them. Even at the bookstore where she worked, regular customers began to recognize her, asking for discreet selfies when they thought she wouldn't notice. But the worst was the call from her mother in Virginia. "Is what the magazine says true, honey?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Are you dating that businessman? He's your father's age, Emily. What are you thinking?" The disappointment in her mother's voice was like a dagger. All her life she had worked to make her parents proud, to justify the sacrifices they had made for her to study at Columbia, and now she felt she was disappointing them, that they were seeing their daughter turned into a cliché, an object of scandal. "It's complicated, Mom," she replied, fighting back tears. "It's not how they paint it. He respects me, values me for who I am. It's not a whim or an adventure." But the words sounded hollow, even to her. How to explain the connection she felt with James, the conversations until dawn, the way he encouraged her to pursue her dreams when the outside world only saw a young opportunist and a middle-aged man in a midlife crisis. That night, when James arrived at the apartment, he found her sitting on the floor surrounded by magazines showing their photos, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," he murmured, kneeling beside her. "I should have warned you better. I should have protected you from this." Emily looked up with a sudden determination shining through her tears. "I don't want you to protect me," she said firmly. "I want you to teach me how to face this. If this is real, if we're going to really try, we can't hide forever. I need to learn to navigate your world without losing myself." James looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He expected reproaches, perhaps even that she would want to end the relationship. Instead, he found a resolution he hadn't anticipated. "Are you sure?" he asked, gently caressing her cheek. "Once we fully enter the public eye, there's no turning back." Emily took a deep breath, aware that she was at a crossroads. She could retreat, return to the safety of her previous life, simply be another student, or she could advance into the unknown, with all its challenges and possibilities. "We don't choose who we fall in love with," she finally responded. "We only choose what we do about it, and I choose to fight for this for us with eyes wide open." As James embraced her, Emily thought of all the love stories she had read in her literature classes. None of those that endured over time was simple or easy. All involved obstacles, sacrifices, moments of doubt. "Perhaps true love isn't one that makes life easier," she reflected, "but one that gives us strength to face its complications, that makes us grow even when it hurts, that challenges us to be braver than we thought possible." The following weeks put Emily's determination to the test. Media scrutiny increased, fueled by James's refusal to make official statements about their relationship. His silence, which he considered a way to protect her, only fed the speculation. "Romance between the tycoon and the student. True love or calculated strategy," read the headline of a new publication. The article insinuated that Emily could be using her relationship to secure connections in the publishing world, since Harrison Global had recently acquired a major American publishing house. "You shouldn't read these things," James advised, finding her absorbed in the article one morning. "They just want to sell more copies. Nothing they say changes what we know is true." But the printed words had an insidious power. They infiltrated her mind in moments of vulnerability, feeding doubts she had tried to ignore. What if his interest in her was fleeting? What if, as the magazines suggested, she was just a temporary distraction from his responsibilities, a way to feel young again? The academic impact was equally devastating. During a presentation on a Virginia Woolf paper she had spent weeks researching, Emily noticed the skeptical looks of her classmates, the barely disguised whispers. And when Professor Martin, who had always valued her analyses, gave her a mediocre grade with the observation that he expected a greater level of depth, she knew they were no longer judging her solely on her work. Even Sarah, who had initially tried to understand, began to distance herself. Invitations to study together became less frequent. Messages went unanswered for days. "It's like they don't recognize me anymore," she confessed to James one night, as they contemplated the city from his penthouse terrace. "As if everything I was before had been erased by this new image they have of me." James remained silent for a few moments, his face a study in guilt and concern. "Maybe we should take a break," he said finally, the words clearly difficult to pronounce. "Until you finish your studies, until you establish your career, you could go study abroad. I'd help with the contacts, but no one would need to know there's a connection between us." The proposal hit Emily like a betrayal. After assuring her they would fight together, promising they would face the world as a couple, now James was suggesting a separation, as if their relationship were an obstacle for her, not a source of strength. "Is that what you really want?" she asked, moving slightly away. "To get rid of me until I'm successful enough not to embarrass you?" "No," he exclaimed, visibly hurt by her interpretation. "Emily, I'm trying to protect you, to give you the opportunity to shine on your own, without my shadow eclipsing you." "I don't need you to protect me," she replied, with a coldness that contrasted with the usual warmth of her voice. "I need you to trust that I'm strong enough to handle this, that I made this decision with my eyes open." But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Over the following days, a silent abyss began to grow between them. Conversations, once fluid and endless, became cautious, full of safe topics that avoided the real problem. Physical contact, once natural and constant, now seemed calculated, almost formal. It was at this low point in their relationship that Emily met Catherine Vidal, the best friend of James's ex-wife. The encounter occurred at a benefit gala to which James had convinced her to go, arguing that hiding would only feed more rumors. Catherine was an elegant woman in her 50s, with a face that had once been beautiful and now reflected a more mature and complex beauty. She approached Emily when James was accosted by some investors, offering her a glass of champagne with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So you're James's new infatuation," she said, with a tone that made the words sound more like an accusation than an introduction. "I must admit, he has a consistent type." Emily accepted the glass with caution. "I don't think we've been formally introduced." "Catherine Vidal," the woman replied, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've known Isabel, James's ex-wife, since college. We remain close friends. And I've seen this pattern before, darling." Emily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Catherine took a sip of her champagne, looking over the glass with calculating eyes. "Do you know why he chose you? Because you're exactly as she was. Young, idealistic, full of dreams and admiration for him. He's not falling in love with you, Emily. He's trying to recreate what he lost, seeking redemption with the wrong person." The words were like daggers. Emily tried to maintain her composure, reminding herself that this woman had her own loyalties, her own motives for sowing discord. But when she looked across the room and found James's eyes, she saw something in his expression that confirmed her worst fears. A shadow of recognition, of guilt before he could hide it. That night in the car back to the apartment, the silence between them was deafening. "What Catherine said," Emily finally began, her voice barely audible. "Catherine has always been loyal to Isabel," James interrupted, with evident tension in his voice. "She would say anything to sabotage any possibility of me being happy again." "Look me in the eyes and tell me there's no truth in what she said," she insisted. "Tell me you don't see someone else when you look at me." James stopped the car at a red light, turning to face her. The crimson light bathed his face, accentuating the conflict in his eyes. "At the beginning, maybe there were echoes," he admitted with difficulty. "Similarities that attracted me unconsciously. But Emily, what I feel for you now is unique. It's real. It's about you, not about ghosts from the past." But the damage was done. Catherine's words had touched insecurities Emily had tried to ignore. The difference in age, in experience, in worlds, everything acquired a new and sinister meaning in this light. They arrived at the apartment in silence. For the first time since they had begun their relationship, the intimacy between them felt forced, artificial. They moved through the rooms like polite strangers, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional abyss opening between them. That night, as James slept, Emily remained awake, staring at the ceiling and facing a painful truth. Perhaps love wasn't always enough. Perhaps some wounds were too deep, some differences too fundamental to be overcome just with feelings, however intense they might be. Sometimes we fall not because we're weak, she thought with sad clarity, but because we've been holding too much weight for too long. And sometimes what seems like a fall is actually the first step to a new path, one we must walk alone to discover who we really are. The following days passed in a fog of emotional confusion for Emily. She moved between classes and work like an automaton, smiling when necessary, responding when spoken to, but feeling fundamentally disconnected from everything and everyone. James had left for Berlin for a technology conference, a separation that both secretly welcomed. The physical space gave them the opportunity to process what had happened, to evaluate their feelings without the intense gravity they experienced in each other's presence. One afternoon, while reorganizing books in the bookstore, Emily found a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Opening it, her eyes fell upon verses that seemed written for her. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious, like tombs. The words resonated in her like a revelation. For months, she had been defining herself in relation to James, his girlfriend, his confidant, his emotional anchor. Even her independence, the apartment, her studies, was tinged by his influence, by his implicit presence in every decision. Who was she, really, without him? Who did she want to be? That night, in the solitude of her apartment, Emily made a decision. She took out her old laptop, a gift from her parents when she entered university, and began to type. Not a literary analysis for some class, not a structured essay, but something more personal, the beginning of a novel she had been gestating inside her for years. She wrote until the first rays of sun filtered through the window. She wrote about a young woman from a small town who travels to the big city, not in search of love or fame, but in search of her own voice. She wrote about the fear of disappointing, about the weight of being the first, about the confusion of finding herself between two worlds without fully belonging to either. When she finally stopped, with numb fingers and an exhausted but strangely clear mind, she realized she had found something that was completely her own, something no one could take away or question, that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. 3 days later, when James returned from Berlin, he found her transformed. Not drastically, she was still the same Emily, with her honey-colored eyes and shy smile, but there was a new serenity in her, a quiet resolution he hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," she said, after an embrace that felt different, less desperate, more conscious. They sat on the small terrace of the apartment, with the New York afternoon stretching around them like an impressionist canvas of red rooftops and intense blue sky. "These days apart have helped me think," Emily began, her voice firm despite the internal tumult. "About us, about me, about what I really want." James nodded, his expression cautious but attentive. "I've been reflecting a lot too. I think Catherine was right, at least partially," she continued, determined to expose the uncomfortable truths they had been avoiding. "I think part of what you saw in me at the beginning was an echo of your past. And I think part of what attracted me to you was the security, the validation you represented. We were both looking to complete something in each other." James began to protest, but she gently raised a hand, asking him to let her continue. "But that doesn't mean what we've built isn't real. It just means it's built on unstable ground, and we need more solid foundations if we want it to last." Her words hung suspended between them, charged with truth and vulnerability. James looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "What do you propose?" he finally asked. Emily took a deep breath. This was the hardest part, the decision she had reached during her nights of insomnia and self-discovery. "I need space. Not to move away from you, but to find myself, to build my own identity, my own achievements, independently of our relationship." She saw the pain cross James's face, but also a flash of understanding. "Are you ending things between us?" His voice barely a whisper. "No," she replied, surprised by the clarity of her conviction. "I'm proposing that we transform it into something healthier. Something based on two complete people who choose to be together, not two incomplete people who desperately need each other. She explained her plan. She would continue in the apartment, insisting on paying fair rent, but would return to a more independent life. She would seek a job at a publishing house, not through James's contacts but on her own merits. She would finish her novel, submit it to literary contests. She would reconnect with friendships she had neglected, rebuild burned bridges. And us, she continued, her voice softer now. We'll continue to see each other, but less frequently, building something more conscious, more balanced, giving ourselves the opportunity to choose each other every day, not out of habit or dependency, but by active decision. James remained silent for a long time, processing her words. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to release tensions accumulated over years, he slowly nodded. "I've never met anyone like you, Emily Morgan," he said, with a mixture of sadness and admiration. "Most people would run away or cling more tightly, but you seek the hardest path, the one that requires the most courage." "It's not courage," she replied, taking his hand across the table. "It's survival. It's understanding that true love shouldn't diminish us, but expand us. Give us both roots and wings at the same time." That night when James left, not forever but to begin this new phase of their relationship, Emily experienced a contradictory mixture of emotions. There was fear, of course, fear of having made the wrong decision, of rejecting something many would consider a dream come true. But there was also a strange feeling of lightness, as if she had dropped a weight she didn't know she was carrying. She sat at her laptop again and continued where she had left off, the words flowing now with greater confidence, with greater authenticity. "The most significant conflicts," she wrote, "are not those we wage against the outside world, but those we face within ourselves. The conflict between who we are and who we aspire to be, between the security of the known and the promise of the possible. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in resolving them definitively, but in learning to live with them, to let them shape us without completely defining us." The New York summer unfolded over the city with its relentless heat, transforming streets into rivers of melted asphalt and filling rooftop bars with people seeking respite under colorful umbrellas. For Emily, it was a season of interior transformation as intense as the exterior heat. With methodical determination, she began to rebuild her life on new foundations. She reconnected with Sarah, inviting her for coffee at her favorite spot in the West Village, a small place with shelves overflowing with used books and a lazy cat that dozed by the window. "I've missed you," she confessed, direct and vulnerable, "and I'm sorry I distanced myself." Sarah studied her for a few moments, her initial reserve gradually melting in the face of her friend's sincerity. "What's changed?" she finally asked. "Because something is different about you, I can see it." Emily smiled, recognizing the perception she had always admired in her friend. She told her about her decision, about the healthy distance she had established with James, about her rediscovery of what she really wanted in life. "I still love him," she explained, absently stirring her coffee. "But now I understand that I need to build my own path, that a relationship should be a choice, not a necessity." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand with genuine affection. "That's the Emily I met freshman year, the one who had fire in her eyes when she talked about changing the world with her words." Reconnecting with Sarah was just the beginning. Emily reconnected with university classmates she had neglected, rediscovered the pleasure of literary gatherings in cafes in the East Village, where young writers shared their works in progress under the benevolent gaze of plaques commemorating Whitman and Ginsberg. Her novel grew each night, page by page, becoming a refuge where she could explore her most intimate thoughts, her fears, her hopes. Set in the historic streets of Charleston, a city she had visited with her grandmother in childhood, the story followed a young woman who discovered ancient manuscripts that seemed to predict the future, forcing her to question the very concept of destiny and free will. In June, she took a bold step. She applied for a reader position at a small independent publisher, Labyrinth Editions. The interview was intense, with questions that tested not just her literary knowledge but her judgment, her ability to identify original voices in a sea of mediocre manuscripts. "Why should we hire you?" finally asked Michael, the editor-in-chief, a man in his 60s with inquisitive eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses. "Because I read as if my life depended on it," Emily responded without hesitation. Because I understand that each manuscript isn't just text on a page, but someone's naked heart. And because I promise to treat each one with the respect it deserves, whether brilliant or terrible. A week later, she received the call. The position was hers. A part-time job that combined perfectly with her studies, allowing her to support herself financially without depending on anyone. The salary was modest, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. Her relationship with James, meanwhile, had acquired a new dimension. They saw each other less, generally once a week, but their encounters now had a different quality. Without the pressure of unarticulated expectations, without the desperation of needing each other, they discovered a way of being together that was more conscious, more present. Sometimes they cooked together in her apartment, experimenting with regional American recipes. Other times they attended poetry readings or emerging art exhibitions. On one memorable occasion, they spent an entire weekend in Charleston, walking the cobblestone streets where Emily had set her novel. James listening, fascinated as she explained the historical layers of the city, from colonial times through the Civil War, all leaving their mark on that labyrinth of alleys. It was during that trip, sitting in a small plaza at dusk, that James made a confession that would change the course of their relationship. "I've started therapy," he said with a vulnerability that was still difficult for him to show, for the first time since the divorce. Emily looked at him in surprise. James, who had always considered therapy a weakness, something for people who couldn't handle their own problems, was now admitting to having taken this step. "Why?" she asked simply. He contemplated the church rising majestically against the sky, aflame with the setting sun. "Because I realized you were right. That I was trying to recreate something lost, fill voids with people instead of confronting them directly. And because—" he paused, searching for the right words. "Because if I really want to be with you, with the real you, not with my idea of you, I need to be right with myself first." Emily felt a wave of emotion at this admission, this act of courage that had probably cost him more than any business negotiation. "I'm proud of you," she said simply, taking his hand. They didn't need more words. Back in New York, summer advanced with its leisurely pace. Emily divided her days between the publishing house, where each manuscript was a new adventure, her final classes of the course, and nights dedicated to her own novel, which was now approaching its conclusion. One August morning, as the heat forced New Yorkers to seek refuge in public pools and air-conditioned shopping malls, Emily made an impulsive decision. She gathered the complete manuscript of her novel, now titled The Charleston Manuscripts, and submitted it for the prestigious Pulitzer Prize, one of the most important literary honors in America. She didn't tell anyone, not even James. She didn't want to create expectations, didn't want the result, whatever it might be, to be influenced by anything other than the value of her own words. That same day, as she returned home under a scorching sun, she received a call from her mother. The tension between them had gradually diminished over the previous months, especially since Emily had traveled to Virginia for a long weekend, presenting her family with a more authentic and secure version of herself. "Your father and I are thinking of visiting you in September," her mother said, with that mixture of firmness and affection that characterized her. "When it cools down a bit. We want to see New York, see where you live, meet your friends." The implicit invitation didn't go unnoticed by Emily. "We want to meet him." She didn't say it, but it hung in the air like an unasked question. "I'd love that," Emily replied, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and relief. "There's so much I want to show you." That night, sitting on her small terrace as the city finally breathed after a stifling day, Emily reflected on the months that had passed, on how, paradoxically, distancing herself from James had brought their worlds closer, on how, by finding herself, she had discovered a way to love that didn't involve losing herself. "True introspection," she wrote in her journal, "doesn't consist of constantly looking at oneself in the mirror, but in learning to see oneself reflected in the world and recognizing oneself in it. It's not about finding definitive answers, but about asking better questions. And perhaps most importantly, it's understanding that we are always a work in progress, a novel being written page by page, with chapters we cannot yet imagine." September arrived in New York like a blessing, softening the relentless heat and tinting the sky a deeper blue. Sidewalk cafes filled again in the evening, Students returned to the streets with newly purchased books, and Emily felt that her life had acquired a more harmonic rhythm, a balance that before had seemed impossible. At the publishing house, her work had expanded. Michael, impressed by her intuition for discovering promising voices among the mountain of manuscripts they received daily, had assigned her the task of creating a new collection dedicated to young American and international authors. It was a vote of confidence that filled her with pride and responsibility in equal measure. "I want you to think big," Michael had told her in a meeting where he explained his vision. "Don't look for the safe, the commercial. Look for voices that have something genuine to say, that show us the world in ways we hadn't considered before." Emily had nodded, recognizing in that commission an echo of her own personal evolution, of her own path to authenticity. Her parents' visit was scheduled for the third weekend of the month. With a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, Emily had planned every detail: reservations at authentic but not touristy restaurants, visits to museums off the beaten path, walks through neighborhoods that showed the true soul of New York. And yes, she had also arranged a dinner with James. "Are you sure?" he had asked when she proposed it, during one of their evening walks through Central Park. "I don't want to impose, especially after how they initially reacted to our relationship." "I'm sure," she had responded firmly. "My parents need to meet you, the real you, not the image they've constructed based on magazine gossip. And I need the most important worlds in my life to meet, even if briefly." On the morning of her parents' arrival, Emily received unexpected news. Her novel, The Charleston Manuscripts, had been selected as a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Not the winner yet. That decision would be announced in April. But being among the 5 finalists out of more than 300 manuscripts submitted was already an extraordinary achievement for a debut novelist. The news left her in a state of happy stupefaction. The first thing she did, almost by instinct, was call James. "I'm a Pulitzer finalist," she exclaimed when he answered, her voice a mixture of incredulity and euphoria. "The Pulitzer? Emily, that's incredible." The admiration in his voice was palpable, genuine. "But wait, when did you submit a manuscript? I didn't know you'd finished your novel." "I didn't tell anyone," she confessed, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. "I wanted it to be just mine, whatever the result." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and when James spoke again, his voice was laden with emotion. "I'm so proud of you. Not for the recognition itself, but for your courage. For creating something from scratch and sending it out into the world without safety nets. That is true strength." His words touched something deep in Emily. It wasn't just the praise that moved her, but the recognition of her autonomy, that this achievement was entirely her own. Not the result of connections or influences, but of her talent, her work, her unique voice. That day when she met her parents at Grand Central Station, she gave them the news immediately. Her father, a man of few words who expressed his emotions more through actions than speeches, lifted her in an embrace that seemed to transport her back to childhood. Her mother, always more pragmatic, was already making plans for the trip to New York if she won the prize, calculating which family members could accompany her. "I'm so happy you found your path," her mother told her that night as they prepared dinner together in the small apartment. It was a seemingly simple comment, but Emily recognized in it a deeper approval, an acknowledgement of her maturity and independence. The meeting with James, scheduled for Saturday night at a quiet restaurant in the West Village, began with the expected tension. Her parents, especially her father, showed a cautious courtesy, studying this man who had entered their daughter's life in such a sudden and controversial way. But as the night progressed, as James told them anecdotes about his childhood in Maine, about his first jobs selling newspapers at local markets, about his arrival in New York with barely $200 in his pocket, the barriers began to fall. He wasn't the distant tycoon they had imagined, but a man who had fought for every achievement, who understood the value of hard work and perseverance, values they themselves had instilled in their daughter. "My Emily was always special," her father said at one point during the evening, after his third glass of wine. From when she was little, when other girls asked for dolls, she wanted notebooks to write her stories. "We always knew she was destined for something different." James nodded with a complicit smile. "That's exactly what captivated me about her. That authenticity, that inner light that cannot be dimmed." Emily observed the exchange with a sense of unreality, as if she were witnessing the fusion of parallel universes that should never have met. And yet here they were, her past and her present animatedly discussing the peculiarities of the Virginia accent and the best routes to tour Maine. At the end of the night, as they walked back to the apartment under a sky speckled with stars, her mother drew close to her, taking her arm to create a moment of intimacy. "He's a good man," she said simply. "Different than I imagined, but you can see he truly loves you. And more importantly, you can see he respects you." Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't expected approval, just understanding. Receiving both was an unexpected gift. That night, after her parents had settled onto the small sofa bed in the living room, Emily went out to the terrace to breathe the fresh September air. New York stretched before her, an ocean of lights twinkling like fallen stars. Her phone vibrated with a message from James. "Your family is wonderful. I now better understand where you come from, what shaped you. Thank you for sharing that part of yourself with me." Emily smiled, feeling a deep gratitude for this new chapter in her life. For the first time, she didn't feel she was choosing between distinct worlds, but building bridges between them, creating a richer and more complex landscape where all facets of her identity could coexist. "New perspectives don't arise from abandoning who we are," she wrote that night in her journal, "but from expanding, from adding dimensions we hadn't considered before, like a canvas that seemed complete until someone suggests a new color, a new light, and suddenly the image is deeper, truer, more ourselves than we had ever imagined." Autumn settled over New York with its palette of ochres and reds, transforming Central Park into a kaleidoscope of warm colors. For Emily, October arrived laden with new challenges and opportunities that seemed to materialize at every step. The news of her nomination for the Pulitzer Prize had spread like wildfire through New York literary circles. Suddenly, publishers who had never shown interest in her work now requested meetings, offering contracts for future works, inviting her to participate in panel discussions about the future of American literature. "It's curious how this world works," she commented to Michael during one of their meetings at Labyrinth Editions. "6 months ago, I was simply a student submitting manuscripts to contests. Now everyone wants a piece of something they haven't even read." Michael, with his decades of experience in the industry, had smiled with that mixture of irony and wisdom that characterized him. The literary industry loves to discover what already exists. They believe they're finding raw diamonds, when in reality you were already a diamond. It's just that now someone else has confirmed it. Despite the tempting offers, Emily maintained her commitment to Labyrinth Editions, the small publisher that had trusted her before external recognition. However, she accepted a proposal that seemed especially significant to her, teaching a creative writing workshop at Columbia, her own university, directed at first-year students. "I want to give back something of what I've received," she explained to Sarah as they had coffee at their usual corner in the West Village, "to show them that their voices matter, that their stories deserve to be told, even when no one else seems to be listening." The workshop quickly became one of the most rewarding aspects of her life. Each Thursday, for 2 hours, she guided a diverse group of young writers through the labyrinths of narrative, helping them find their authentic voice amid the noise of influences and expectations. James, meanwhile, was experiencing his own transformation. The therapy he had begun months ago was producing subtle but profound changes. For the first time in years, he spoke openly about the pain of his divorce, about the insecurities he hid beneath his image of a ruthless businessman, about his fear of abandonment that paradoxically manifested in keeping everyone at a distance. "I'm learning to distinguish between control and connection," he explained to Emily during a weekend in Boston, an impromptu trip to celebrate the first anniversary of their meeting. They walked barefoot along the Charles River, letting the cold October waves lap at their feet. "All my life I've sought to control my environment, my relationships, as if that could protect me from pain. But control is an illusion. The only real protection is in authentic connections, in shared vulnerability." Emily listened, recognizing in his words an echo of her own interior journey. "It's scary, isn't it? Letting down the defenses, showing yourself as you truly are." James nodded, looking toward the horizon where the river merged with the sky in a silvery grey infinity. "It is, but it's also liberating, as if I had been holding my breath for years and could finally breathe deeply." That weekend marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, they weren't two people seeking to complete each other, but two complete individuals who chose to share their lives from freedom, not from necessity. Back in New York, November brought with it a new, unexpected turn. Labyrinth Editions had received a purchase offer from Harrison Global, James's company. The news fell like a bomb on the small publisher, with opinions divided between those who saw an opportunity for expansion and those who feared losing the independence that characterized them. "Did you know anything about this?" Michael asked Emily directly when the news went public. "Absolutely nothing," she responded with total honesty. "And I assure you I'm going to speak with James about it." That same afternoon, she entered James's office in Manhattan without announcing herself, something she had never done before. She found him in the middle of a video conference with international investors, but upon seeing her, he asked for a recess and cleared the meeting room. "What does this mean?" Emily asked, showing him the news on her phone. "Are you trying to buy my publishing house? Why didn't you consult me first?" James seemed genuinely surprised by her anger. "It's a purely business decision, Emily. Harrison Global is diversifying its investments in the cultural sector, and Labyrinth Editions has an exceptional catalogue with international potential. Don't talk to me like I'm a shareholder," she replied, with a firmness that surprised them both. "You know how important that publishing house is to me, what it represents in my professional path. How do you think I'll feel working there when everyone thinks I got my position because my boyfriend is the owner?" Understanding slowly reflected in James's face. He hadn't considered that angle, blinded by what he perceived as a business opportunity beneficial for everyone. "I'm sorry," he finally said, with a sincerity that left no room for doubt. "You're absolutely right. I should have consulted you, should have considered how this would affect you personally. I'll withdraw the offer immediately." Emily shook her head. "It's not about that. I don't want you to make business decisions based on our relationship. I just want you to understand that our worlds sometimes collide, and when that happens, we need to talk. We need to find solutions together." That conversation marked another advance in their dynamic. For the first time, Emily had confronted James on his own turf, expressing her concerns without apologizing for them. And he, instead of adopting his habitual defensive posture, had truly listened, acknowledging his mistake. In the end, they found an innovative solution. Harrison Global would withdraw its direct offer, but would establish an independent cultural investment fund that could provide financing to Labyrinth Editions and other small publishers without interfering in their editorial line or internal management. "It's a modern patronage model," James explained when they presented the idea to Michael. "Private capital at the service of culture, without the chains that usually accompany these investments." December arrived with its frenetic holiday energy, transforming New York into a spectacle of lights and celebrations. For Emily, the year that was ending had been an emotional roller coaster, a journey of self-discovery that had taken her further than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, as she decorated her apartment with a small wreath, a concession to the festive spirit that she had never particularly felt was her own, she received an unexpected call. It was a representative of the Pulitzer Prize, informing her that while the final decision wouldn't be announced until April, as a finalist, she was invited to participate in a writer's residency program in Los Angeles during the month prior to the gala. The opportunity was extraordinary. A month in an apartment facing the ocean, with all expenses covered, surrounded by other finalist writers, and with seminars given by some of the most important figures in contemporary American literature. But it also meant a month away from New York, away from her work at the publishing house, away from James. That night, as they shared a simple dinner in her apartment, she told him about the invitation, preparing herself for a discussion about how to handle this temporary separation. To her surprise, James showed no doubt. "You have to go," he said with conviction. "It's a unique opportunity, not just for the contacts, but for the experience itself. Los Angeles in winter has a special light, a different energy from New York. It will inspire you in ways you can't imagine." His unconditional support, free of any trace of possessiveness or fear of distance, confirmed for Emily how much they had both grown in their relationship. "I'll come visit some weekends," he added, with a warm smile. "Los Angeles is just a 6-hour flight away. And besides, I'd love to experience the city through your eyes." As she packed for her trip to Los Angeles, scheduled to begin on January 1st, Emily reflected on the year that had passed, on how an apparently casual event, spilling champagne on a stranger's tie, had triggered such a profound transformation in her life, on how, by allowing herself to love, she had also found the courage to claim her own identity, her own voice. True transformation, she wrote on the last page of her year's journal, isn't a destination one reaches, but a continuous journey. It's not about becoming someone completely new, but a more authentic, fuller version of who we've always been. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is that we don't make this journey alone. We find fellow travelers who challenge us, support us, inspire us to keep advancing even when the path seems impossibly steep. She closed the journal, looking out the window at the nighttime New York she had come to love so much. The next year would bring new challenges, new opportunities, perhaps even a prestigious literary prize. But regardless of the external outcome, Emily knew she had already won the most important thing, the freedom to be herself, to love on her own terms, to write her own story. Los Angeles welcomed Emily with a surprisingly clement January, days of winter sun that bathed the Pacific in a silvery light, and clear nights where the stars seemed to hang lower over the horizon. The apartment assigned for her artistic residency was in Venice Beach, with a direct view of the ocean and the constant sound of waves as the soundtrack to her writing days. The first days were of adaptation, of reconnaissance. Los Angeles, with its sprawling geography and rhythm so different from New York's, offered her a new perspective, a change of scenery that stimulated her creativity. Mornings were dedicated to workshops and seminars with established authors, afternoons to exploring the city and working on the final adjustments to her novel before the final decision of the Pulitzer jury. Among the finalists, Emily found kindred spirits, other young writers with the same hunger for words, the same need to tell stories that illuminated unexplored corners of human experience. She became especially close to Ryan, a writer from Chicago whose novella about the Great Depression seen through the eyes of a child had captured the jury's attention for its originality and brutal honesty. "I never thought I'd get this far," Ryan confessed to her one night as they shared a bottle of wine in a small bar in Silver Lake. "I wrote this story because I needed to exorcise family ghosts, not because I expected recognition." Emily nodded, recognizing in his words an echo of her own motivation. Sometimes the most personal stories are the ones that resonate most universally, as if, by digging into our most intimate truths, we touch something that belongs to everyone. The conversation flowed until the early hours of the morning, an exchange of ideas, dreams, and fears between two people united by the love of words. As they said goodbye, Ryan embraced her with familiarity, with that immediate closeness that sometimes arises between creative souls. "I think you're going to win," he told her in her ear. "Your novel has something the others don't have, a completely unique voice, unmistakable." Emily thanked him for the compliment, although inwardly the competition had ceased to be the most important thing. The truly valuable aspect was this time of creative immersion, this ephemeral but intense community of brilliant minds. The first weekend, as promised, James traveled to Los Angeles to visit her. He arrived with eyes bright with anticipation, like a child about to discover a long-announced treasure. Emily waited for him at LAX, nervous to share with him this new facet of her life, this new version of herself that was emerging in Los Angeles. The 2 days that followed were a whirlwind of shared discoveries. Emily showed him the literary Los Angeles she was getting to know, century-old bookstores hidden in alleys in downtown, cafes where Faulkner and Fitzgerald had written, corners that appeared in novels by Chandler and Didion. James, for his part, allowed himself to be guided with contagious enthusiasm, absorbing every detail, asking questions that revealed a genuine interest not just in the places, but in what they meant to her. "It's like I'm getting to know you again," he told her during lunch at a small restaurant in Echo Park, where they shared Californian cuisine and local wine. "I see facets of you that hadn't emerged in New York. Here you shine in a different way." Emily felt a warmth expand in her chest at these words. It wasn't just the compliment that moved her, but the attentive observation that motivated it. James was truly seeing her, not through the filter of his own expectations or needs. "I feel different here," she admitted, as if this change of scenery had liberated me from certain expectations, even those I had imposed on myself. On Sunday afternoon, As they walked along Venice Beach with the last rays of sun gilding the horizon, James suddenly stopped, looking at her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "I have something to tell you," he began, with an unusual seriousness in him. "These months apart, seeing you flourish on your own have made me realize something important." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. Despite all the evolution of their relationship, a part of her still feared abandonment, still expected him to decide that the distance was too much, that the differences between them were insurmountable. "I've been thinking about the future," he continued, taking her hands in his. "About what I really want for the coming years." "And what have you decided?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from betraying her nervousness. "I've decided I want to change direction. I'm considering leaving the executive directorship of Harrison Global, moving to a strategic advisor role, dedicating more time to what really matters to me, the cultural fund we created, social development projects in underprivileged neighborhoods, maybe even writing that book about sustainable businesses that I've always postponed." The confession took her completely by surprise. Of all the things she expected to hear, this was perhaps the last. "But why? You built that empire from scratch. It's your life." James gently shook his head. "It was my life. Or rather, it was what I used to substitute for a life. I hid behind meetings and acquisitions and market strategies. But these months, seeing your courage to follow your passion, to risk everything for what you truly love, have made me question my own choices." Emily tried to process his words, the magnitude of the change he was considering. "Are you sure? It's a huge decision." "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied with a calm that contrasted with the transcendence of what he was saying. "And I want you to know that this isn't for you, or at least not just for you. It's for me. I finally understand what you've been showing me all this time, that true freedom isn't in having more, but in being more authentic." As the sun definitely sank into the Pacific, tinting the sky orange and purple, Emily felt something crystallize inside her, a certainty, a clarity about what really mattered, about the kind of life she wanted to build, about the love she deserved and was willing to give. "I love you," she said simply, words they had exchanged many times but that now seemed to acquire a new, deeper meaning. "I love you not for what you do or what you have, but for who you are when all the layers fall away, for your courage to change, to grow, to question yourself." They kissed there with their feet sunk in the cold sand, with the sound of waves as witness, with the first star timidly appearing in the darkening sky. The following weeks passed with dizzying speed. Emily immersed herself completely in the experience of the artistic residency, absorbing knowledge, establishing connections, polishing her manuscript until each word seemed exactly right, inevitable. James, meanwhile, had begun the transition process in his company, announcing his intention to step aside, preparing the ground for a new stage of leadership. Reactions were mixed: confusion in financial markets, speculation in the economic press, concern among some investors. But for the first time in his professional life, James seemed unperturbed by external opinion, focused solely on what felt right to him. The night of the Pulitzer ceremony arrived wrapped in the typical early spring mist of New York in April. The event was held in the historic Columbia University campus, a setting that seemed fitting for the gravity of the occasion. Emily had chosen a simple but elegant dress in emerald green, complemented by antique earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, the same one who had taken her to Charleston in her childhood, unknowingly inspiring the novel that now competed for one of the most prestigious literary prizes in America. James waited for her in the lobby, impeccable in a dark suit that accentuated his natural bearing. Seeing her descend the stairs, his expression lit up with a mixture of pride and admiration that made Emily feel more beautiful than any mirror could have shown her. "Whatever happens tonight," he told her, offering his arm, "you've already won. You've found your voice, told your story. Everything else is noise." The ceremony proceeded with the solemnity characteristic of these events. Speeches about the importance of literature in times of digital immediacy, about the tradition of the Pulitzer Prize that had discovered some of the most important voices in American letters, about the exceptional quality of the finalists of this edition. When the moment of the announcement arrived, Emily felt time slow down, each second stretching to infinity. She squeezed James's hand under the table, seeking an anchor in the midst of the emotional storm that traversed her. And the winner of this year's Pulitzer Prizes. The silence in the hall was absolute, an expectant void that seemed to absorb even the sound of breathing. The Charleston Manuscripts by Emily Morgan. For an instant, Emily didn't react, as if the words were in a language she didn't completely understand. Then reality hit her with all its force. She had won. Her first novel, born in nights of insomnia and doubt, written in the margins of a life she was learning to claim as her own, had been chosen among hundreds. What followed was a whirlwind of congratulations, photographs, brief interviews. Emily moved as if in a dream, answering questions, thanking for praise, without fully assimilating what was happening. It was only later, when the crowd began to disperse and the formal event gave way to a more intimate celebration, that she could finally process the magnitude of the moment. She found James in a quiet corner, talking animatedly with Ryan, the finalist from Chicago who had become her friend. Seeing her, both raised their glasses in a silent toast. Ryan excused himself discreetly, leaving them alone. "How do you feel?" James asked when she joined him at the small balcony that offered views of the Columbia campus illuminated. Emily considered the question for a few moments, searching for the exact words to describe the whirlwind of emotions that traversed her. "I feel so validated," she finally responded. "Not by the prize itself, although of course it means a lot, but because I bet on myself when no one else did. Because I had the courage to write something completely my own, without thinking about pleasing anyone else." James nodded, perfectly understanding what she meant. "That's the most important victory, the one no one can take from you, no matter what happens afterward." As they contemplated together the lights of New York, Emily had an absolute certainty. This wasn't the climax of her story, but barely the beginning. What would come after? The challenges of sudden fame, the expectations for her next novel, the adjustments in her relationship with James as they both navigated new personal and professional territories would be complex, sometimes difficult, always interesting. But she would face each chapter with the same determination that had brought her here, with the certainty that life, like the best literature, doesn't offer perfect endings but stories that continue to evolve, characters that keep growing, revealing new facets of themselves with each page. The climax isn't the end, Emily thought, resting her head on James's shoulder as the New York night enveloped them in its fresh embrace, but the moment of greatest tension before the story takes a new direction. Not the culminating point, but the inflection point that leads us to unexplored territories, to versions of ourselves we cannot yet imagine. A year later, New York surrendered to a particularly generous May, with clear skies and temperatures that invited long evenings on terraces and in parks. Emily contemplated the city from the roof of her new apartment in Soho, a bright space she had bought with the income from her novel, now in its 5th edition and translated into 6 languages. The month since the Pulitzer ceremony had been an emotional roller coaster of emotions and experiences. The publication of the Charleston Manuscripts had catapulted her to a modest but significant fame in the literary world. She had traveled throughout the United States presenting the book, participated in international literary festivals, even given lectures at universities on the creative process. But perhaps the deepest change had been internal. The insecure young woman who had once feared not being enough, who had sought external validation to feel complete, had been replaced by a woman who recognized her own worth, who dared to occupy space without apologizing. The doorbell interrupted her reflections. Opening the door, she found James, holding a small box wrapped in simple paper. "Happy anniversary," he said, with that smile that still made her heart skip a beat. They had chosen to celebrate not the date of their first encounter at the Metropolitan Opera, but the day Emily had made the decision to seek her emotional independence, the turning point that had transformed their relationship from something potentially toxic to something truly enriching. James had also changed profoundly. As he had announced, he had left the executive directorship of Harrison Global, maintaining a significant stake but not involving himself in daily operations. Now he dedicated most of his time to the cultural fund they had created together, supporting small publishers, emerging artists, and educational projects in disadvantaged areas. "What is it?" Emily asked, accepting the package with childlike curiosity. "Open it and find out," he replied, following her to the terrace where they had prepared a simple dinner to celebrate their anniversary. Inside the box was an antique journal, with worn leather covers and pages yellowed by time. Opening it, Emily immediately recognized the handwriting. It was the diary of a woman who had lived in Charleston during the 19th century, exactly the type of manuscript that had inspired her novel. "How did you find it?" she asked, turning the pages with reverence, absorbing fragments of a real life that seemed to dialogue with the fiction she had created. "It wasn't easy," James admitted. "I've been looking for something like this for months, contacting antiquarians, collectors, historical archives. I wanted to find something that connected with the essence of your novel, that closed the circle somehow." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. It wasn't just the gift itself, but the thought behind it, the deep understanding of what it would mean to her. "It's perfect," she murmured, embracing him tightly. "Thank you for understanding me so well." As they dined under the starry New York sky, sharing stories from the past months and plans for the future, Emily reflected on the journey they had traveled together, on how that casual encounter had transformed into something so significant, so fundamental in both their lives. "I have news," James said, as they were finishing dessert. His expression was serious, but illuminated by contained joy. "I've been offered a teaching position at a university in Los Angeles, a course on sustainable entrepreneurship, based on my experience and the new directions we're exploring with the fund." Emily felt a flip in her stomach. Los Angeles was a 6-hour flight from New York, but still, "It's a great opportunity," she replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. "How long would you be there?" "1 semester initially, but they've suggested it could become something permanent if it works well. And that's where I wanted to get to." He paused, as if searching for the exact words. "I've been thinking that maybe you could consider coming with me." The proposal hung between them, laden with implications. It wasn't just an invitation to change cities, it was an invitation to take a new step in their relationship, to build something more shared than what they had so far. "You don't have to answer now," he quickly added, seeing her thoughtful expression. "I know you have your life here, your work at the publishing house, your friends, your writing workshop. I just wanted to present the possibility." Emily remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the New York horizon she had come to love so much. The city that had welcomed her when she was just a scared student from Virginia, the city where she had found her voice, where she had learned to be herself. "You know what's most beautiful about all this?" she finally said, turning to look at him directly. "That whatever my answer is, I know it will be okay. If I decide to stay, you'll support me. If I decide to go, it won't be out of dependency or fear of losing you, but by conscious choice. We've built something that doesn't need constant proximity to survive." James smiled, with that mixture of pride and admiration he always dedicated to her when she expressed a fundamental truth with crystal clarity. "Exactly. It's not an ultimatum, not even an expectation. It's simply a possibility we can explore together. Or not." That night, as James slept beside her, Emily thought of all the paths she could take, all the possible versions of her future. She could stay in New York, continue her career at the publishing house, finish her second novel that was already taking shape in her mind. She could accompany James to Los Angeles, discover new creative horizons in that city that had welcomed her so warmly during her residency. She could even propose an intermediate solution, divide her time between both cities, create a life that wasn't limited by geographic borders. The important thing, she realized, wasn't the specific decision, but the freedom with which she could make it. The certainty that whatever her choice, she would continue to be herself. Not a powerful businessman's girlfriend, not a Pulitzer Prize winner, but Emily Morgan, a woman who had learned to write her own story, to occupy the center of her own narrative. The following morning, with the clarity that sometimes comes after a night of reflection, Emily made her decision. She woke James with a soft kiss, enjoying the moment of sleepy confusion in his eyes before consciousness fully illuminated them. "I've thought about Los Angeles," she said, without preamble, "and I think we could try it. Not necessarily permanently, at least not at first. I could maintain my collaboration with Labyrinth Editions remotely, come to New York regularly for the writing workshop. It would be an experiment, a new adventure." James's smile spread slowly, like a sunrise. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel you have to do this for me." "I'm sure I want to try," she replied firmly, "and that's all anyone can really be sure of." The rest we'll discover along the way as we've done so far. They kissed under the golden light of the New York morning, sealing not a definitive agreement, but a shared disposition to continue evolving, to continue discovering new facets of themselves and each other, to continue building a relationship based not on desperate need, but on conscious choice. That afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, her favorite place in the city, Emily observed James with new eyes. She saw not just the man she had fallen in love with, but the person he had become throughout their shared journey. More vulnerable, more authentic, more willing to question his own certainties, and she saw herself reflected in that transformation. Stronger, more confident, more capable of occupying space in the world without diminishing herself. Two people who had grown not despite each other, but thanks to each other. Not merging into a single entity, but enhancing their individualities through a love that didn't seek to possess, but to liberate. "Do you know what my grandmother used to say about true love?" she commented, as they sat on a bench facing the lake, watching couples rowing in small boats under the May sun. "Tell me," James replied, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "She said that true love isn't looking at each other, but looking together in the same direction. For a long time I didn't really understand what that meant. I thought it was about having the same goals, the same dreams. But now I think it's deeper than that." "And what do you think it means?" he asked, genuinely interested in her interpretation. "I think it means sharing a vision of life, a way of being in the world. Not necessarily doing the same things or always being in the same places, but facing existence with similar values, with a shared understanding of what truly matters." James nodded slowly, processing her words. "Like two trees growing close, with roots that intertwine underground, but each extending toward the light in its own way." "Exactly," she smiled, always surprised by the capacity of this apparently pragmatic businessman to find poetic metaphors in the most unexpected moments. "And that's what we've built, isn't it? A love that gives us both roots and wings at the same time." As the sunset tinted the New York sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily allowed herself to feel a deep gratitude for everything experienced, for that casual encounter that had changed the course of her life, for the challenges that had forced her to grow, for the courage she had found to claim her own identity, even amid the whirlwind of emotions that falling in love entailed. And above all, for the certainty that her story, like the best novels, didn't have a definitive ending but an open horizon, full of possibilities, of chapters yet to be written. Los Angeles would be just another setting in that continuous narrative, another canvas where she would continue painting the contours of a life lived with authenticity and purpose. True love isn't a destination one reaches, Emily thought, as she watched James feed the ducks in the pond with breadcrumbs, with that childlike smile that revealed the man behind the businessman, but a journey one chooses each day, not a definitive answer, but a constant question that invites us to be our best version. And perhaps that's the greatest adventure of all, to continue discovering ourselves, to continue choosing each other, to continue growing together and apart, like two stars that orbit one around the other, mutually influencing without ever losing their own light.